It's just a matter of hours now to one of the world's biggest elections, when nearly 90 million registered voters who've picked up their PVCs go to the polls on Saturday to elect a new president. It's a vital ballot and one of the most tightly contested for nearly 25 years, with 4 frontline contenders having a chance to win, along with 14 others. There's excitement and a sense of tremendous suspense and anticipation. But those who've seen what violence can do to elections in this country and other parts of the world also draw back in fear and trepidation at what could happen if it all goes wrong. But for now, there is hope that the power of the people will be felt at the ballot box, and that the process will not be hijacked or disrupted by unscrupulous elements. So how big a job is it, organizing Africa's biggest election amid so many challenges? Can we trust that there won't be a break in the matrix of the Electoral Commission, INEC, and that its efforts won't be defeated by technology, insecurity, or logistics? I'll be joined by a top crop of analysts who've cut a dash in the historical and sociological study of Nigerian elections. I'm Charles Enyegolu, and this is Arise Prime Time. So this weekend's presidential election, nearly 90 million Nigerians have picked up their permanent voters' cards, or PVCs, and will be eligible to vote this weekend. Because of Nigerian law, we can't report on specifics such as the candidates and their chances, or on things like their campaigns, which have now officially and legally ended. In fact, the law prohibits us from talking about anything that might influence the elections. But there are, of course, a lot of other things to discuss ahead of tomorrow's ballot, which has been described as the most important elections in Nigeria in nearly 25 years. And one of the most important is how prepared the Electoral Commission, INEC, is to hold Africa's biggest ballot.
Not all our operations that are paid for by cash. In fact, the bulk of our operations for the procurement of works, goods, and services are paid for electronically. But we need a small amount of money to pay for the unbanked who render critical services, particularly at the local level. And we anticipated this challenge and interacted with the central bank. The central bank promised us that for the little amount that we need to pay for services in cash, they will make the funds available to us, and they have done so. How soon do we expect results of election to be declared after polling? I just want to say that we will ensure that it is done speedily, but I can't put a finger on the number of days or number of hours it will take, but it will be done speedily. We are aware of the anxiety and the need for us to conclude the process quickly, so it will be concluded quickly.
That's the chairman of the Electoral Commission. I was rather hoping he'd talk about how prepared he is, but that is implied, of course. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the constitutional and human rights lawyer, Clement Nwankwo, who's also the executive director of the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center in Abuja, and the convener of the Civil Society Situation Room, which monitors Nigerian elections, and by Professor Ikechukwu, executive director of Development Specs Academy, member of the editorial board of This Day newspaper, and professor of strategic management and human capital development. And from our off-site studio, I'm also joined by Awal Musa Rafsanjani, chair of the Transition Monitoring Group, which is the biggest coalition of civil society organizations working on election monitoring in Nigeria. He's also the executive director of the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, CISLAC, head of Transparency International Nigeria, and chair of the board of Amnesty International Nigeria. Lots of hats you wear there, Rafsanjani. We will come to you in a minute. But thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for joining us. And let me start with you as we went, from the introductions with Clement Nwankwo. There is, of course, we heard the INEC chairman there. There's the small matter of facilitating an election in which nearly 90 million people are expected to vote. How enormous a task is the logistics of that?
Thank you, Charles. Just to point out that I was convener of the Situation Room until more than 2 years ago, and the Situation Room is deployed across the country, observing elections, and several suicide organizations numbering more than 70 are part of the efforts that the Situation Room is doing, keeping a handle on these elections. Certainly, this would be the highest number of registered voters on the voters register. We haven't had this number of voters on the voters roll, so it's really not a small task that lies ahead, dealing with more than 90 million voters who are set and mobilized to go out to vote. I think when you look at all of the tasks, the issues of logistics, the challenges of security, the challenges of mobility, and people constrained by lack of monies to move around. Certainly there's quite a lot to do, but it's really happy to hear the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission state quite clearly that he has gotten all that he needs to conduct free and fair elections. So the sense everyone has is that given the assurances that he has given, that everything is within INEC's control, and the hope is that we do have an election that matches the expectations of citizens.
Well, thank you very much indeed for introducing us to the issue of the concerns about logistics. And Professor Ikechukwu, beyond the logistics, there are of course other big challenges. Clement Nwankwo hinted at it. It includes demonetization and a cash crunch, insecurity, etc. But all the relevant agencies feel they'll be able to surmount these challenges, and that we will have a verdict that is a true representation of the will of Nigerians. Nevertheless, it can't be easy holding an election in the midst of those challenges, can it?
Well, not exactly, but again, let's also not exaggerate the challenges. To begin with, let's make a distinction between what INEC needs to deal with and what, in fact, INEC needs to depend on. The security agencies, the military, the armed forces, they are service providers to INEC to secure an environment where INEC will carry out simply a regulatory function to regulate people's behavior in the process of choosing leaders through an electoral process. That's on one level. Now, the level of INEC itself, an evaluation of INEC's performance. This is the first time we had the longest campaign, I think, throughout the history of the existence of this country, nearly 1 year. Not even in the First and Second Republic did you have that kind of a stretch, if I'm not mistaken. So you find then that in 8 months, we've gained a lot in the fact that parties that were used to practically carrying out political burglary, which is they have their primaries, questionable as it is, in 2 months, before you know it, there's a president, there's a governor, not anymore. They were forced to stretch themselves for 8 months, and it then became clear that a lot of them had no narratives, had no way of talking to Nigerians because they were not used to doing it. And so all of that went on, and now INEC. I think this is probably one of the best communication electoral process we've had in a very long time. Festus, the commissioner for, I think, communication in INEC, he was all over the place. Anytime an issue arose, INEC very quickly clarified it, beginning with the number elections, FCT and all of it. And then the chairman himself, uncharacteristically, has been very communicative, has been always available, and is clearly been hands-on. So if we look at all of that and then at the issue of logistics, concerning the possibility of a challenge with moving around, I have a perspective I will share on that. Number one, is it true that voters are supposed to register in places contiguous to their places of residence? I think the answer is yes. To that extent, it is taken for granted that most Nigerians registered in places that was readily or were readily accessible to where they were living or staying. But that does not remove the fact that some didn't. If, for instance, I'm a trader and I chose to register near my shop, and on the day of the election, I'm about 45 kilometers away from the shop, unless it's by witchcraft, which INEC does not approve, there's no way I can vote. So taking matters all together, should we be optimistic? In principle, yes. If we look at the beavers, the claims about efficiency, the extent of INEC's truly dedicated engagements throughout the period leading up to what will happen tomorrow, there should be reason for optimism. Should we be worried? Yes, because what you call opportunistic mischief would also arise if the environment is not managed. But INEC is not responsible for managing the environment.
Right.
And so all of it put together, three things stand out. This is probably one of the most interesting, and I put interesting in inverted commas, elections we've had since independence. This was the first time the parties were compelled for a long time to say something. The pattern also changed. The media got less money from parties. Engagements were different. So the templates that have worked all the time were kind of put under pressure this time around to develop new approaches. So what do I see on the whole? An excited environment, more people who are speaking out of conviction, hopefully all of them holding PVCs, and an electoral regulatory body that stands out,
Right.
Looking good. But let's hope that looking good is borne out by tomorrow's engagement.
Thank you very much indeed. And let me come to you, Awal Musa Rafsanjani. Thank you for your patience. And you are, of course, the chair of the Transition Monitoring Group, which I understand is the biggest coalition of civil society organizations working on election monitoring in Nigeria. Tell us about that and about your deployment of election observers.
Thank you very much, and good evening, viewers. Of course, Transition Monitoring Group, TMG, was established in 1998, immediately when the government of the military junta then announced the transition program. So civil society leaders seated there, claiming Nwankwo was one of the leaders at that time that conceived the idea of having an election monitoring body that will monitor the transition program, not only the election day, but also the entire transition of the Abdulsalam Abubakar at that time. And since then, TMG has been, engaging in voter education, civic education generally around governance, and it has also, created opportunity for so many organizations to specialize beyond just the general observation. Many of the TMG members, they are, grouped in thematic areas. Some of them are looking at the election within the context of gender perspective. Some of them, they look at election within the security perspective. Some of them, they look at people with the disability, perspective. And some of them, they look at security generally of the election. So Transition Monitoring Group, because it is an umbrella of various organizations at various community, state, local government, and national level. So it has this large, combination of different groups working on different areas. And therefore, since the first election in 1999 till to date, the TMG has continued to engage with the Nigerian public in terms of ensuring that they sensitize them, they educate them to conduct themselves in non-violent manner, and also engaging political parties, because a lot of times the political parties are not being engaged, but TMG has been working to ensure that the political parties themselves too, they are actually accountable and there is internal democracy in their operation. So therefore, TMG in this 2023 has been working with the Palladium scale, which is being supported by the United States of America, to ensure that the Nigerian people are engaged in the process. So we conducted, a national election debate. We also carry out a lot of trainer for voter education. We've also done a lot of political sensitization. We've also done a lot of training for the observers to know how to even document their observation. So we are engaging, and we will continue to engage. But beyond that, TMG is interested in ensuring that election delivers good governance. We cannot be monitoring election observing election just for the sake of observing. We want something to happen positive for the Nigerians and for the political development in the country. That is why the new perspective of TMG is to ensure that we do not only observe election and stop at that, but we continue to engage the governing process. We want to make sure that there's accountability at local, state, and national level. That is the only way it will be useful for the Nigerians to invest their energy in observing what's going on either at the primary election or at the national election generally. So TMG will continue to engage Nigerian people, will continue to engage political parties, will continue to work with other partners, including media, to ensure that we have accurate, appropriate reporting of election observation in this country. So we are working with the various media organizations to support the effort of TMG to ensure that we have first-class information that is verifiable, that is authentic, that is verifiable to share it with the Nigerian people as the election is going on. So we are going to be working with various Nigerian newspapers and media generally.
Right, okay. Thank you for that. Obviously, you play a vital role in Nigerian elections, and that's something that is quite welcome. Let me come to you, Clement Nwankwo, because of course, as Musa Rafsanjani mentioned, I mean, when all the talk about sort of monitoring groups and situation rooms was started, I mean, you were at the very beginning of that conversation, and you are a very big part of an election monitoring group today. I mean, what methods have you developed to monitor this election?
Thank you, Charles. I think for us with this election, there are several issues. One is to be able to take, and we do have observers whom we spent several months training to understand the various things to look out for. We have followed the process with political parties, with Electoral Commission, even with the National Assembly in coming up with a new law, and that's why we do have the Electoral Act 2022, which is what is the foundation document or the legal framework for conduct of elections. We have trained observers that are deployed across all of the states. We have partner organizations who are part of the Situation Room, more than 70 organizations. And so across every polling unit, across every ward, local government, you would have observers. We're listening to what these observers are sending in to us. We're analyzing these observations. We're escalating where necessary concerns with the Electoral Commission. So when we do receive reports from the field regarding incidences or occurrences or something untoward as we walk towards the elections, where we can, we escalate that to whether it's the security agencies, the police, the Electoral Commission, publicly put out this information so people are aware of what is going on. So we are prepared, and as Rafsanjani mentioned, there are several groups who are part of the election observation process. Some taking on thematic issues, including security, including persons with disability, women issues, young persons issues. All of these are all of the several thematic concerns for us as observers in order to help to make the process a successful one. And this is the largest election in Nigeria in history. So everyone is concerned that it succeeds, and working towards that as well.
Absolutely. And Professor Ikechukwu, you another noted psephologist. I mean, you follow these elections, particularly this one, quite closely and keenly. What are the main issues at the front of people's minds in this election?
Well, I'll come on that in 30 seconds, but I just want to add, based on the ongoing conversation, that other organizations are doing the sort of thing Clement and Awalo have mentioned, even if they are not. You don't look sterile. Luxera Foundation headed by Husani, Development Specs
Father
Academy,
Husani,
yes, of
yeah.
which I'm executive director. We went to several states. Luxera did the same thing. Citizenship, political education, particularly focusing on the youths, to tell them that it's your future. If you're used, you're not going to have a future. If you're not happy with what has been going on all this while, think about it and vote properly. So invariably, that's what it comes to. But looking at the issues arising from this election is at several levels. This is probably one of the elections since 1999, where a lot of people have had to raise existential questions as they walk towards the election. They are seeing promises not fulfilled. They are seeing hopes dashed. They are seeing individuals they took seriously turning out just to be, if you like, saprophytes, feeding and taking care of only themselves. They are seeing grinding poverty. They are seeing loss of jobs. And they're seeing also in an environment where it was impossible to blame only the ruling government. The gradual emergence of the consciousness that we have an elite and leadership crisis rather than a political party crisis. Now, what that has done is what you might call willy-nilly political education. You don't want to learn, so you're learning the hard way, without even going consciously to mobilize the people like Luxera, like the civil society, like the Development Space Academy. A lot of people are mobilizing themselves. So what I see is growing political consciousness. But the issue arising from that is the possibility of, if you like, extravagant enthusiasm, where you have people who believe that this is good, but who then don't realize that it has to be organized. So that places a new burden on the emerging political leadership of all the parties. If you're now having more and more convinced followers, you also have a duty now to prepare a template for discipline in political and other forms of engagement. Other issues that might arise, yes, there was a suspicion and fear that money was going to be deployed.
Right.
Even now, it is alleged and suspected that it's being deployed. In fact, a couple of hours before I came here, one of the media houses called, that some organizations like trader associations and all of that and individuals are being given palliatives. So I asked them, palliatives from what? They fell down from a tree, or they have a sudden attack of malaria and they're giving them pain relievers. That the people should find it insulting to think that a day before, hours before an election, that's when somebody suddenly thought they needed palliatives. So all of that, and of course you saw the report earlier today of the lawmaker who was arrested in Rivers with over $450,000, etc. And then a report, I think, of EFCC picking up somebody with 38. Look, there will always be people who hope to adopt and work with the old methods. There is some reassurance in the perceived disposition of the president to allow the process to run. But that's the president. There will be aspiring mischief makers. Whether they will succeed is another matter. So on the whole, the issues on the table are at several levels. One, at the level of the individual, personal conviction as basis for voting. At the level of group consciousness, the realization that as groups, a lot of people haven't gained anything. Instead, they've degenerated further despite their loyalty. And finally, that briefly, the economy is grinding, yes. And, you know.
Okay, well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. What you were saying was actually very interesting and very, very sort of well explained. Let me come to you, Awal Musa Rafsanjani, because as Professor Ikechukwu was saying, I mean, that there is much more than just the political will to see a fair and credible ballot. I mean, even though that is obviously crucial. Is there the willingness, do you think, on the part of ordinary people, security agencies, electoral officials, the government, etc., to roll out a really fair and verifiable election? Because that's what people want to hear from people like yourself. I mean, are you seeing that demonstrable commitment?
Thank you very much. I think it's very clear and very obvious that Nigerian people, they are eager to see that they exercise their fundamental right to vote, and this time around also vote rightly, because people are tired of the living condition they find themselves as a result of some people in the leadership at local, state and national level that don't seem to be caring about their condition. So therefore they are motivated and mobilized to actually come out to ensure that they participate in this process. And Transition Monitoring Group actually did mobilize Nigerians to participate in the registration, because when you don't have valid voter card, you cannot participate in the election. So Transition Monitoring Group worked very well along to other organizations to ensure that we mobilize Nigerians to first register and get their PVC. And then at the same time also have been working to ensure that they restore the confidence of Nigerians, because many Nigerians actually have lost hope and confidence before that this election, the election that they have been participating in the past, has not helped in any positive way to their life. But I think, with the intervention or with the effort of getting the new Electoral Act amendment, what civil society actually spearheaded and worked day and night to ensure that it is amended to guarantee and assure Nigerians that their vote will count. Many of them actually have that confidence. Again, the INEC first has also been giving confidence on Nigerian people to actually come out, because after the Ekiti, Osun, and the Anambra election, many Nigerians began to have hope and confidence that the process, if consolidated, will help to improve the electoral process in the country. Secondly, we have also seen some effort in terms of ensuring that the security are out there to ensure that they allow and protect Nigerians to vote according to their conscience, to not be intimidated or harassed. It is important that we continue with that effort. I think it is absolutely necessary that the political parties, because this is where the problem is, some of the political parties and politicians, despite the fact that we have been able to sign peace accord, the kind of utterances some of them are making is very scaring. And I think it is absolutely necessary that they are reminded that there's a law in the country. And if a public officer or politician goes out to be mobilizing people to engage in violence, the law has to play its role. Otherwise, the infinity will continue.
Absolutely.
The last thing that I want to say is this commercialization of the election, that's the vote trading. The president had intention to say that let's minimize vote buying. Unfortunately for him, he has forgotten that these same people, they own the banks, they have the shareholders, they are the biggest shareholders in the banks, and they do this trading in dollars, pounds sterling, euro, and even asset and other political commitments, so that when they get into power, they will give juicy contract. I think we need to look at also the role of some security officers, because bad elections are happening with collaboration of some bad police security agent. So most of the vote buying are not just this 2,000 naira, 5,000 naira. It is done with large amount to people that they are able to even disrupt or disrupt the election. So I expect that the president should actually directly speak to the security agent, so that they are not biased, so that they are not be seen to be supporting one political party or one candidate or the other. Again, the electoral official,
right,
the INEC official have also talked to them to ensure that they should not engage in any attempt to undermine the credibility of the election that will hold. If we are not able to do that, we will be able to mortgage the confidence that Nigerians are having to participate in the 2023 election.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And Awal, I want to thank you very much indeed. Awal Musa Rafsanjani, you're watching Arise Prime Time, plenty more still ahead. But it's at this point that we say thanks very much indeed for joining us, to Awal Musa Rafsanjani, Chair of the Transition Monitoring Group and Executive Director of CISLAC. He's a very busy man, he's got things to do. We appreciate your coming in to talk to us. Clement Nwankwo and Professor Ikechukwu are still with me and will be joined imminently by the policy strategist, Arise News analyst, and founder and executive director of Agora Policy, Waziri Adio. Stay with us. Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. I'm Charles Aniagolu, and it's just a matter of hours now to one of the world's biggest elections. Nearly 90 million registered voters who've picked up their PVCs go to the polls on Saturday to elect a new president. It's a vital ballot and one of the most tightly contested for nearly 25 years, with 4 frontline contenders in the race. There is excitement, suspense and anticipation, also fear and trepidation and what could happen if it all goes wrong, especially amongst those who've seen what electoral violence can do in this country and in other parts of the world. But on the eve of the ballot, there certainly is enormous hope that the power of the people will be felt at the ballot box and the process will not be hijacked by unscrupulous elements or disrupted by a break in the logistics matrix or defeated by technology. And still with me, assessing it all within the reporting restrictions that are in place here in Nigeria, the constitutional lawyer and human rights activist and lawyer Clement Nwankwo, who's also the executive director of the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center in Abuja and was the convener of the Civil Society Situation Room, which monitors Nigerian elections, and by Professor Ikechukwu, executive director of Development Specs Academy, member of the editorial board of This Day newspaper, and professor of strategic management and human capital development. And from our off-site studio, I'm also delighted to say we're also joined for the rest of the program by the policy strategist, Arise News analyst and founder and executive director of Agora Policy, Waziri Adio. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And let me come straight away to you, Waziri. Thank you for joining us. And this is going to be arguably the most hotly and closely contested election since the end of military rule in 1999. I mean, do you detect a great sense of anticipation amongst Nigerians, or perhaps there is trepidation at what might happen?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, there's an element of both anticipation, and trepidation, like you said. Anticipation in the sense that, like other people have mentioned, this is the biggest election, not just in Nigeria, but in Africa. 87 million people have picked up their, permanent voters card. That's the population of many African countries rolled into one. And also, this is about the most competitive election that we've had in this republic, so many things riding on this election, So there's a lot of anticipation. There's also anticipation about whether, the kind of thing that we saw in 2015, where there was power shift, whether that is likely to happen also this time around, though we don't have a president that's an incumbent, but we have an incumbent political party. And so it's there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of anticipation. There's also a lot of worry about how some of the rhetorics, predating this election, the impact that they could have, post the election. So there's a lot to watch out for. But for me, and I think for most Nigerians, I think it's very important for this election to be free and fair, to be credible, and to be clean, so that the winner will emerge, in a way that is acceptable, and the losers will also be able to play by the rules. So we look forward to tomorrow, and we hope that after the polls, the ballots are counted tomorrow, a winner will emerge, and if a winner doesn't emerge on the first ballot, whenever it emerges, it will be an election that will be acceptable. And also, we have a leader that will be able to get to task on the key issues facing this country today.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Waziri. And Clement Nwankwo, what about turnout? I mean, are you expecting it to be high this time? Because, I mean, in the last election in 2019, turnout was the lowest on record since 1999.
Well, that's the expectation that we all have. I think, as Waziri mentioned, there's a whole lot of anxiety amongst citizens, amongst those who have been registered. They want to vote. We've gone through challenges in the last 5, even 8 years. The economy has deteriorated very badly. There's a sense in which people feel that their conditions of living have worsened. There's a sense in which people, not even a sense, the level of insecurity has worsened, and living conditions really have been very difficult for a lot of people. So people are reacting by saying, look, we participated in the last elections. We're not quite sure why we voted, but this time we know why we are going to vote. In some ways, it's some sort of referendum, but really, I think that people are motivated to come out to vote, and we expect that they will, citizens and registered voters will struggle and make every effort to go out to vote. Now, whether the conditions are ripe to encourage people to go out and vote is perhaps a different issue. The level of insecurity means that people will be cautious. There are people perhaps who registered far away from where they currently are working or where they even live, people who register in their home villages who are unable to travel because of the crisis with fuel supply across the country, because of the crisis with access to cash to be able to pay for their transportation to where they are registered to vote. This might be constraining factors, but certainly it is quite clear to us who are watching what is going on that there's a lot of enthusiasm and people want to go out to vote.
Yes, absolutely. That's the sense that we detect as well. And Professor Ikechukwu, beyond some of the things that have already been mentioned and whether or not the level of enthusiasm is actually going to be there, and conventional wisdom suggests that it is, there are also other factors, aren't there? I mean, there is, of course, a history of elections being delayed in Nigeria, isn't there? Sometimes at the 11th hour. And that is often at the back of people's minds as we approach tomorrow.
Oh, several things are at the back of people's mind. One of them, we'll get on to the matter of the delays, which is often due to logistics. The Southeast, there's been a lot of concern that people will be too frightened to come out. And I've been engaged in conversations around that, and there are a few things that must be put on the table from the standpoint of objectivity. In all instances where you've had disruptions of security, of shooting, of whether unknown gunmen or known gunwomen or blind shooters, the numbers have never exceeded 6 to 7. They are armed with AK-47, I agree, but how many bullets do you have in one gun? So opportunistic interventions in INEC offices and all of that, that's a different matter from an organized group with enough numbers to overrun a region. So I think that the other thing, the point that has to be really made, which is already standing on its own, is that people can actually come out freely and vote because you don't have the numbers to disrupt elections in the Southeast. That's one. Two, the matter of delays. Yes, that can happen. And that's why if you remember my very first comment at the beginning of this program, is for us to make a distinction between what INEC is responsible for and what must be made available to INEC for it to function properly. INEC is responsible for conducting elections. INEC is not responsible for creating the right environment for elections to take place. That's the job of the security agencies. Now, in the matter of logistics, a vehicle can break down, a boat can capsize with the material, there might be issues, so all of that can happen, and still you end up with credible elections when the facts are put on the table, when there's clear indication that there was no human error or mischief. And you recall that happened in the Anambra elections. Ihiala had to vote, I think Ihiala and one other place had to vote the next day. If INEC had not conducted itself with credibility and integrity, riots would have erupted instead. But behold, they said, oh, it will be here. Everybody went home quietly. That level of trust had not been demonstrated before now for Nigeria's electoral body. So the concerns are genuine, but a lot of them are likely to be logistical or technology determined and the rest of it. That will still not be sufficient to lead to lack of credibility, I believe.
Yes. And Waziri Adio, I mean, you've been crunching this and on Arise News as well on the program lots of times with your Agora policy think tank. Presumably, hopefully, by Sunday morning, if things go well, counting will begin, and it'll take, I imagine, about 3 or 4 days for the results to emerge. I wonder if that length of time might be cut short by technology because technology is being used to upload the results this time?
Absolutely. One of the defining features of this election is the enhanced use of technology. Technology, came into the frame from, I think, 2011 when we had the permanent voters card. It was upgraded, in 2015 actually, right? But now they have gone some step further, which is not just that you are going to have the BVAS for accreditation of voters, but they are also going to use the BVAS machine to upload the results to the INEC result viewing portal, right? So the IREV, So actually, by the time the elections finish, like around 2 p.m., by the evening of that day, the various situation rooms will have a pretty good idea of how the election, will have gone. Of course, it's only INEC that is allowed to officially declare the result. But technology is going to introduce a lot of transparency into this, and also will enhance confidence, of people. Because if you are going to get the result across the country, real time. So if the technology holds up, this will be a big plus, And to go back to what I said earlier, a lot is riding on this election, and there are people who believe that, candidate A will win, candidate B will not win, and all of that. So if this election is conducted in a very transparent and open manner with the aid of technology, that would make this thing open to everybody, so that it will be clear if anybody has lost. And of course, we have a situation where we don't have people who admit to having people don't concede in Nigeria. Nobody accepts that they've lost the election. We have the situation of bad losers. But if this is done real time and in front of everybody, the room for mischief will be considerably reduced. So this is something that I think will be helpful, not just for the conduct of the election, but also in managing the tension that will arise post-election.
Right, that's a very good point. And let me come to you, Clement Nwankwo. Obviously, we have a very big, not just domestic audience, but continent-wide and across the world. We're in millions of households. For the sake of our international audience who may not be familiar with everything to do with Nigerian elections, remind us of what the candidates need to do to win, because it's not just a case of first past the post, is it? I mean, where the first person who gets there wins.
Yeah, certainly. For you to win, you would have to have the majority of votes, and you would have to have the spread, which means that you have to have 25% of the votes in at least 2/3 of the states of the federation. Nigeria has 36 states plus the FCT. So you would need to have the majority of votes, but also those votes must exceed a quarter of the votes from each of these 37 sub-entities. So if that doesn't happen, then it means that even if one candidate has the highest number of votes, but none has a quarter of the votes in at least 37 of the sub-entities, then you might be faced with a runoff situation. That runoff situation, of course, would be the parties that have the highest number of votes, and then the one that has the highest spread, but also then the one that has the highest number of votes from amongst the contestants.
Okay, well, thank you for setting that out. And also, just for the sake of our international audience, again, just to explain that there are no diaspora votes, and there are no proxy or postal votes in Nigerian elections. So in effect, everyone has to vote in person. And Professor Ikechukwu, this election, of course, very significant, not just for Nigeria, but for Africa. Huge international attention with former heads of state and representatives of ECOWAS, the AU, the EU, the UN, the US, the UK, all here to observe these elections. So it is fair to say that the eyes of the world are on Nigeria, trying to make sure that these elections are free and fair.
Yeah, not only that, I think the greater element of the concern is actually to see that Nigeria elects a leader and a government that will work as a 21st century leader and as a 21st century government. We've never been this low and battered economically. Social cohesion is at its worst. Every index you can think of as a human development index, we are scoring very poorly on it. And internal insecurity makes a mess of it. Look, the world is not just concerned or interested, the world is frightened and thoroughly alarmed. If anything goes wrong with Nigeria, the population of our people that will spill over will overrun the rest of Africa, will wreck them. And there's a perception, and a few of us, I'm sure Claire must have experienced that in several places. There's a perception among African countries about what you might call the rambunctiousness of Nigerians. We are perceived to be bold and aggressive, not necessarily troublesome, but very easily tending to dominate our environment. And now this is also the country in Africa that holds the greatest hope, because in all these countries that are coming to watch, the highest population of non-citizens who are highly educated are Nigerians. And this is where they come from. And now Nigeria has a prospect of either raising Africa in general international perception or wrecking Africa by collapsing, and the flood waters from the damaged walls of the dam will take over the rest of the place. That perception is real. And that's why you find it's not just about the international community. Why is it that most African countries are somewhat hostile to Nigerians? Whether in visa, whether in visits. We had an event in, I think, Zambia, an elaborate event, and we came, we needed to do an advert in the station, what do you call it, SLB, that 4-letter station, international TV, and we came, spoke to them, this is the volume of advert. They said, our percentage is 10%. We said, well, that is true, but look at volume consideration. They said, no, it must be 10%. I said, listen, if you don't give us further concession, you're going to run your program, and that 1 minute will not earn you a dime. Now, what am I leading up to? It's the response they give. You say, you see, he turned to his colleague. That's what he told you. Nigerians are very aggressive. Right. We told him it's 10%, and he says we should give us more. So, putting all of that together, why are all the heads of states here? They've seen what's going on in this country. It's being overrun by terrorism. Substantial sections of the north have not been governed for more than a year. That concern is a concern to bring back to health somebody or a country that's capable of benefiting all others. And so it's not because they love Nigeria, it's not because they hate Nigeria, but it's like a doctor that must pay attention to save a child that's useful to the family.
That's a very interesting analogy there. And let me come to you, Waziri Adio, in the dying minutes of the program and on the back of what Professor Ikechukwu said there. I mean, I imagine that running your think tank, Agora Policy, I mean, you churn out a lot of information and statistics. I mean, you sort of wake up every day, you punctuate your existence with sort of information, and you look at the clock, you look at your phone, you look at the news, and you hope that what you see isn't going to depress you, but that you'll have a sigh of relief and that nothing horrible is going to go wrong. So I imagine that you're bracing yourself for tomorrow.
Absolutely. And there's a lot to worry about, but I choose to bat on the side of hope. I think Nigerians will come out in big numbers tomorrow. I think by and large the elections will go well, and I think the elections there will be itches here and there, but will not be significant enough, to color the outcome of the election. And I think, a winner will emerge. I want to believe on the first ballot. I think, yes, it's good that this is going to the wire. It's good that, the level of competition has been raised. It's good that, we are testing the maturity of our democracy and all of that. But, the level of anxiety, the tension is also, getting a bit intolerable. I think Nigerians want to have this, get it done with, and flip the page and hopefully begin a new chapter, with a new set of leaders, that will build on what has been done and also chart the country, push the country in a new direction. So yes, there's a lot of reasons to be apprehensive, but I think will come true. Nigerians, this is what we do. We are masters of brinksmanship. We pull to the edge and we look into the abyss and we pull up, and we move on. So I think, this is a major test for us as a country. We have serious existential issues, like other people have mentioned. But these are issues that are surmountable, and we're Nigerians. That's part of it. Also, we're going to turn the corner, and I think we're going to have an election that will give comfort to the rest of the continent. I think people are worried, not just because of what is going on in Nigeria. All over the world, everybody is going through it in one way or the other, whether it's the economy, right? Whether you're talking about other issues. Some of them are domestic issues. Some of them are external issues, right? But
okay.
We're going to. People are interested in Nigeria. Sorry, this is the point I want to make. Is that there's a lot of reversers. There's a lot of democratic reversers in Africa of recent. And, everybody is interested in the way Nigeria goes.
Right.
That moral leadership that we always provide.
Okay.
And I think this is a point for us to reassert that position.
Okay, it's always good to end a program on a bucolic note, or perhaps I should say a borderline bucolic note this time. Waziri Adio is a policy strategist, a Rise News analyst, and founder and executive director of Agora Policy. And of course, with me here in the studio, Clement Nwankwo, the constitutional and human rights lawyer and director of the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center in Abuja. And of course, Professor Ikechukwu, executive director of Development Specs Academy, member of the editorial board of This Day newspaper, and professor of strategic management and human capital development. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again next week. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye and thank you for watching.